All right, Fazana, we've done 3 episodes so far. I mean, how do you think they're actually going?
I think they're going well. The purpose was really for me to understand what you're thinking, what your thought process is, even your sort of proof from Revelation, different verses, different passages. Um, so I think it's been great up until now, but I personally have quite a few counter arguments, or I have many points on which I disagree, as well as based on the comments and feedback we've received from the audience in the first 3 episodes. So I'd really like this episode to be dedicated to addressing those.
Yep. Okay, great. Sounds good. So it sounds like you're saying it's been great up until now, but now it's going to be a total disaster. You're
One
like,
could,
you're ready.
yes.
You're ready now. Yeah, you were warming up. First three rounds. Took a few punches. But now you've gone back to your corner, reassessed. You've looked around. You looked around the auditorium, the arena, crowd are cheering you on, and now you're back in. You're back in. You're ready. Come on, man, bring it.
Well, well, I would say that you didn't really have anyone in the ring with you first three rounds. I was a spectator more so.
Okay.
But now I've stepped in the ring, so let's see
Oh,
how this
big tone.
goes.
Big. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. Come on then. Let's see what you got.
Cool. All right. So the first, there's several points that I've put together. The first one is what is the actual practical value of this discussion, right? Muslims globally, believers globally, are dealing with enormous issues. There's war, there's poverty, sectarianism, institutions collapsing, loss of faith, families are breaking down, Islamophobia, especially in the West, consumerism, political issues, spiritual issues, right? There's an endless list of things that need to be addressed. And we're just kind of sitting here like, oh, should we have labels or not? Islam, Muslim, capital I, lowercase I, capital M, lowercase. So, one might be listening, and even myself, as we've spent a few hours so far. It's like, well, what is the point of all of this in the context of everything that's happening around us, right?
Hmm.
So, if you could address that, that would be great.
The various issues that you mentioned that are issues like plaguing um, the community, are they also not issues just plaguing people generally speaking? Like, as in human beings are suffering all sorts of different issues, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, if that's the case, are those same issues that in relation to that Muslims are experiencing more or less important than the same issues that everybody else is experiencing? So if there's like spiritual, emptiness, if there's conflict, if there's division, if there's confusion, anxiety, famine, whatever, right? All of these kind of earthly problems that human beings are involved in. You framed it as saying our community is suffering these things. Therefore, why are we talking about this label issue? But would you agree that uh, the all the same issues that are being suffered by anyone and everybody uh, are are the point? Meaning that's the context in which you should frame the discussion, not just our issues.
I would say most of them, yes. I would say most of them are universal issues and problems and struggles. However, I do think a couple of them are specific, and that would be, for example, Islamophobia. And I would also say that manifests within the West, within the US, the UK, uh, more so social media, politically, but then obviously what's happening right now in the Middle East with Palestine, Israel, Iran, etc. You know, it's very much, obviously, um, a few years ago with what happened October 7th, that kind of has now led to this huge, it's almost like people are saying it's worse than what it was after 9/11 in terms of the hate. It's kind of open hate now, specifically targeted towards Muslims. So I would say that is unique to our community. And that might even be at the top of the list. Muslims are being killed, Muslims are being otherized, etc. So,
Okay, fine. I understand that. So we can say that there's at a particular moment in time, there's an intensification of um, hatred or bigotry towards a particular group. But underneath that, in terms of what the actual underlying human tendency is that leads to this kind of behavior, it is that is a common one, right? Which is essentially an in-group, out-group mentality where a particular group gets stigmatized, okay? And whether it's, for example, in a particular context or time and place, this, what I'm trying to say is that this particular phenomenon is a universal human phenomenon. It's always been going on, right? Like essentially tribal differences and tribal used in the broader sense, and then a targeting of a particular group for various reasons at a particular point in time. Okay. Now the reality is that interestingly, on that point, and even all the other points that you've discussed and I've discussed, I'd say a few things. Number one, if a person is asking, why are we discussing this in the context of all the problems going on in the world, I would say that's exactly why we're discussing this. The reason why we're discussing this is because this is just an inroad, a way to start thinking about how do we actually address, right, the issues out there. And my proposition is, and it's part of a broader thesis that hopefully we can continue to explore, is that in order for any group of people to be able to be a relevant contributing force to solve or help to solve problems faced by human beings, generally speaking, which we would agree is essentially a description of the prophetic instinct, generally speaking, right? To solve the problems of that, the entire society, and to combine a worldview, a metaphysics, right, a coherent way of understanding reality, with actual practical solutions that stem from that understanding to then address the various problems. Okay, and then to continue to advocate, to strive in that way, etc., etc. So if that's the framing within which we are, with which we are concerned, well, that's precisely the point. What I'm saying is that if we continue to see ourselves and see the world through this particular lens in a broken up way and in a fragmented way and in an in-group, out-group way, and in a way that ties us back to, forcing ourselves to in inheritance mode with regards to a particular tradition, right, in and amongst all of human beings' life, experiences, then we are making that's just a strategic error, right, in order to be able to actually deal with the issues at hand. So we have an issue today where essentially what people who base their life or claim to base their life on the scriptural guidance are doing are using language, presenting themselves and orienting themselves, thinking about strategizing in such a way that is not fit for purpose for the very objective that they're supposed to be trying to fulfill, right? So that's why. So actually, it's really important to say the point of this is neither just for random philosophical speculation, because like sort of it's like a first world problem type thing, nor is it actually even just instrumental, meaning it's not actually even working backwards in the first instance from the problems that are out there and saying, well, what do we need to do to solve the problems? It's actually going from the very sources themselves. That's why we have in these conversations the bulk of those that we will constantly be crisscrossing between what is contained in these verses, how can we understand them, in a holistic and a coherent way? How do we look at language in a way that then relates to meaning, in the way that we can then actually transport and translate, literally and metaphorically translate over into a different context, and then bring that to life here, right? That then, of course, if you're going to say this is a blueprint that reflects like a formula for success, essentially, it only works if you work with it in a particular way to then apply, to then afford the outcomes, right? The problem solving that's taking place. Now, the other thing I can say, of course, is that, well, show me how the status quo approach is solving the problems. That's the point, right? All these problems are being suffered. So where are the solutions being offered by, the state, like the status quo, if you want to say, or, contemporary Islam as it is, and the contemporary Muslim attitude as it is? I see very little that is, frankly, really addressing the very issues that you're talking about in a meaningful way. So, so that's why. It's not that this on its own is going to solve the issue. We've talked about it as it's an outcome of a deeper way of thinking and understanding about. But it's a great it's a great example amongst many examples. And obviously, as you know, and both of us have worked on, and I've certainly worked on doing the same process with intra, community, let's call it, issues like zakah, like salah, like different things in generally Quranic understanding, interpretation, etc. So it's the same process, but applied to this particular phenomenon. Yeah.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, would you say that the process that we're taking here may be considered a prerequisite to then creating or offering solutions that would then eventually address the problems at
Yeah,
hand?
that are universally comprehensible and intelligible, because now you're not presenting Islamic solutions as Muslims.
Mm.
You're
Okay.
presenting good solutions as people.
Mm. And so
So
a
the
big
point
part of
being,
that
so that
is
you take it out of the framework of it's coming from this
Mhm.
group representing this thing. Like
Right.
if we understand the scripture as a disclosure of something that is like not at the surface level, but fundamentally like axiomatic, universal, like it's coming from the same principle, that central principle that functions, everywhere, all of the time, right? Yes, exactly. So it is a prerequisite to get your self-identification or self-perception correct. If we don't know who we are properly, if we confuse ourselves about who we are, what we're here for, what we're supposed to call ourselves, how we're supposed to see others, how we're supposed to frame history, how we're supposed to look at scripture, how we're supposed to look at the future, how the heck are we going to solve anything? Right? It's like a super, super basic starting point. It's like we gave the analogy, I think, right, of saying before you start a journey and you've got a big group of people to organize and you're trying to get them from here to over there. Unless you understand yourself, the group, the dynamic, the terrain, the journey, the things that are going on, etc., and unless you communicate in a way that everybody in the group understands, that isn't going to cause division in the group before you've even started, what journey can take place? What Sirat
Mm.
Mustaqim, what straight path can even be endeavored upon in the first place? So this is fundamental. That's why I keep using this word existential, which is kind of my, it's my 2026 word of the year. Okay. Because it's like, it is existential, right? And as I said, the contemporary situation has failed. It's already failed. I mean, it's failed and it's not improving as it is right now,
Yeah.
as far as I can tell. I'm happy
Well,
to be corrected, but I
yeah.
can't see it.
Well, I would say that, you know, this approach that you are proposing is a long-term play, because it's going to take time for the identity, the mindset, and everything you just mentioned to shift right in the right direction based on what you're saying. But one could say the same for perhaps some of the, activities taking place now to help people when it comes to their personal spirituality, their connection with Allah, right? So, for example, and so just because we're not seeing the fruits of these current attempts, right, doesn't necessarily mean that they're unsuccessful. It might just be that it's a long-term play, just as you're proposing. But just as an example, the famous narration of the Prophet, peace be upon him, regarding the end times, and he said that there will come a time when basically you, the believers, the community, will be, you know, it's going to be like people are eating off of you like a plate, you know. Obviously, you can correct me or, give the proper translation. But basically, we will be so weak that many, many different groups will just be attacking us or eating from us, so to speak, from like a plate, like a hungry group of people from a plate. And so then one of the companions, I believe, asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, is it because we will be small in numbers? And he said, no, you will be many, you will be large in numbers, just like we are today. So quantity is great, but the quality is missing. And then he said that I believe the two qualities was the love of this world and the fear of death, or the rather even actually the hate, right, of death, not wanting death. So, and then you have the verse in the Quran, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ تَزَكَّى, as just one of many examples, like, um, the one who purifies themselves has succeeded. وَذَكَرَ اسْمَ رَبِّهِ فَصَلَّى, and that person remembers God and connects with God. بَلْ تُؤْثِرُونَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا, but you are in a situation where you love this dunya, or تؤثرون, I guess you could help me with the translation there.
Prefer.
Uh, prefer, yes, you prefer the life of this world. وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى, but the hereafter is better and lasting or longer lasting. So just using these two examples, we are seeing the situation at hand, and it's almost like the Quran and the Prophet, peace be upon him, are giving us the solution or part of the solution, which is, hey, focus on yourself, your own purification, your own heart when it comes to this world, the love of this world, the hereafter. So, you know, yeah. So I don't know if you have anything to say to that.
But I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Where I'm going with that is that when you have I feel like there's been a shift, a big shift towards theskia, purification of the heart, purification of the soul, these types of things over the last maybe decade or so, right? And it's like almost like the principle in Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim, like Allah will not change the condition of a people until they change the condition of themselves. Meaning that there's this approach of, hey, focus within yourself, focus on your relationship with Allah, connection with Allah. And if every individual does that, then essentially Allah will raise our condition collectively because we've chosen to actually focus on ourselves and our hearts, etc.
Okay. I
So
mean, that
meaning that
sounds.
that's a solution that's already, what I'm saying is that is a solution that's already being, to a certain extent, implemented. We haven't seen the fruits of that yet necessarily. But what I'm saying is then, um, I guess what you're proposing is like, I guess what I'm saying is I'm giving the proof from Revelation and from the tradition of the prophet peace be upon him to why that is a good solution. But from your perspective, I guess that's a question.
No,
That's
but
what
a
I'm
good.
asking.
Yeah, but no. Okay. I mean, there's so many problems for me as far as I'm concerned with what you said. Right. Like, okay.
Okay.
Look. Um. Firstly, self purification, a detachment from this world, um, a focus on what really matters, is not something that just so-called Muslims need. Everybody needs that. Okay. So if you want to, let's look at why are we blocking out? You keep saying, keep saying our community, we. When you're saying, see,
Mm,
this is a problem for Islam. Yeah, you need to graduate, yeah, from we meaning Muslims to we meaning humans. If
mm,
you do that, then you're being prophetic. If you're not doing that,
I see.
then you're not. Now the thing is that like because because universal concern is the 101 starting point of this whole project. If you don't have that as a
Mm,
starting point, you can't, like, it just won't work. It just won't work. Okay.
gotcha.
So what I'm trying to say is what you've said is true, that the concern needs to be with those things, that these things are fundamental, right? It starts on the inside, essentially. Things, it's an inside out kind of model overall. I would say, yes, fine. But the grave problem and the grave error that is being made with regards to the way in which this um, knowledge or information or hoped for transformation is being transmitted to people,
Mm,
typically, is that it's being done again in a very insular, jargonistic way, which
mm,
you wouldn't be doing for like your general population, right?
mm,
So the point being is, why are you advising methodologies or ways of connecting to the divine to an English-speaking Muslim crowd, sub crowd within the broader society, in a way that you wouldn't actually do for the rest of the population? When the Prophet peace be upon him advised various practices, okay, to people around him, they're exactly like he would have advised the practice to anybody, right? Because
yeah.
like in his mind, it wasn't for these people, these were universal practices, right? And language is
Mm,
again a key part of it. So again,
mm,
the point being is that a lot of it is being done or imparted in such a way where if there's it's creating a cognitive dissonance. You and I both know this. Why is it that most Muslims, who are English-speaking Muslims, they have no idea what they're saying in their prayers, right? That is enough proof, okay, of the way that the current so-called purification, there's no greater act of purification than the salah, right? Than this
mm,
regular canonical or ritual prayer, right, involving the various movements and words and everything else. Like the fact that that has been almost completely hollowed out, right, of meaning in people's day-to-day experience, okay, is a massive issue, right? The way in which this topic should actually be approached, okay, is to communicate it to people in a way and facilitate it for people in a way that anybody could take it up. If they can't take it up, then something wrong with what you're offering. It's not something wrong with them, right? So, so language plays a big part in that, right? And there's a broader conversation. What I'm saying is that so that's one thing. Okay, it's like, why are we being particular about if this purification thing is important? Why? But that's everybody, like that's important for anyone, because the whole point of all of that stuff is so that you are internally oriented or centered in such a way that your decisions and behavior and your interactions and therefore your policies and your everything, the way you see other people, can all be in order. but that applies
Mhm.
to everybody. That's not a particular Muslim issue. Okay.
Yeah.
So the more we think about taking responsibility for society, the more we'll get things right. Right. The more we think about taking only responsibility for one community, frankly, the more you're going to get things wrong because of the way typically these things are framed, and and then the kind of mix up of the kind of languages and jargon and practice in a way that is not universally applicable for the context. Fittedness is very important, right, to the situation. So if you're going to give a kind of spirituality which is, which kind of is unfitted to the broader cultural context, you've got a big issue, right?
Mhm.
There's a big problem. So I think that's what I'd say mainly in what you're saying. Like, I think it's fine, but I still don't see, I don't see what that has got to do with, like, or I don't see why that raises a problem in terms of what I'm
Yeah.
speaking about, because none of these people
Right.
need to self-identify as Muslim anyway, like that, or think that they're following Islam just because they
Mhm.
are remembering God, or
Yeah.
offering, or choosing to adopt a particular practice for connecting to God. Like, okay, so
Mhm.
do that then. But that doesn't mean you have to layer on this stuff. Why don't we just say
Mhm.
we're trying to devote to God? We're trying to orient ourselves. Like, submission to God or
Mhm.
devotion to God or alignment with reality, as we've discussed, is a central principle. Okay, all of these things can be said and done and felt and deeply. We just don't need to erect frankly, a random Arabic transliterated term on top of ourselves to then make
Mhm.
that's us. You're not that, and then all of the problems from that just go on. So I don't like unfortunately, well, so far anyway, based on what you've presented and based on what I've ever seen of some of the comments and pushback and all the tons of conversations I've had over the years,
Mhm.
I don't see. And some people kind of reply to me and say, well, I mean, I'm not sure this is right. Okay, well, what's the alternative? I'm not seeing it. I'm
Yeah.
not hearing it yet.
Yeah. No, I just want to say firstly, I appreciate you um, sharing your thought process, breaking it down step by step, and addressing these things at kind of a granular level. Because obviously, you've been on your own journey for a couple of decades, probably, and after that long journey, you've come to certain conclusions, certain
Just
convictions.
to correct, I'd say a decade. I'd be embarrassed if I only
Okay,
made this
sure.
much progress in 20 years. But it really, I would say 2015, 16 is when things there's a
Okay.
particular flick, flick switched? No, switch flicked. Yeah,
Yes.
go on.
Cool. So yeah, so at least a decade, and obviously, many of these ideas are going to be new, um, and whatnot to those who are watching. So we can't expect people who are just starting their journey, let's say in
No, of
this
course,
kind
I
of a thought
understand. Yeah.
process, to be able to come around after
No, I
a few
understand.
hours when it's taken 10 plus years. So again, I'm actually complimenting you there, where I'm saying,
Oh,
like,
well,
just kind of
thank you.
breaking it down and taking
Yeah.
these steps, I think hopefully will help people. Yeah.
Yes. No, okay. Fine.
Cool. So now, kind of a follow-up question is, I think I definitely understand where you're coming from in terms of the universal approach, in terms of, a lot of the discussions we've had are a lot around language and how things are framed, how things are referred to, you know. Um, so I guess one question is, like, why is the conclusion that why isn't the conclusion be a better person, be someone who
Oh, you almost
does
said it. You
submission
almost
to
said the right
God better?
answer. You almost said the right
What
answer.
do
Be a
you
better person. Yeah. Well done.
No, what
You're
I mean
getting
is
there. You're
that,
getting there.
the term Muslim, like in terms of one who submits, devotes, and commits themselves to God.
Yeah.
Why isn't the solution, hey, be a better submitter to God,
Okay,
i.e.
fine. Exactly.
Muslim,
Okay.
right?
So say that then.
But
So
but
say that then.
no,
That's
no.
it.
But what I'm saying is, but what you're proposing, especially, obviously, I think the audience should also know that um this is the first episode we're recording since episode 2, which was the one that had the title of, oh, why I would say I don't believe in Islam and I'm not Muslim, right? So we weren't able to address maybe many of the comments that came until
Fine.
this discussion. So I think that's
Hmm.
important to know. So yeah, the question really is, especially based on the second episode, um, why is it that you're saying, hey, leave the label altogether, right? Versus apply the label in a meaningful manner.
Because it's unnecessary, Fazan.
Uh,
That's it. It's just unnecessary. Like, you literally said it,
mm,
right? Okay, I'm trying to be better at devoting myself to God. Remember, I'm trying to be better
mm,
at remembering God. I sometimes forget God, but I'm trying to remember. I do. I try
mm,
engage in certain practices so I can recenter myself and connect myself to
mm,
the divine. Like I'm saying all these things.
Yeah.
I'm literally saying them. Like there's
Mm,
nothing missing in what I'm saying, as far as I'm concerned.
mm,
What's missing? So what I'm trying to say, look, I was thinking about this earlier today, right? It's like, sometimes when you're at home, right, and you do spring cleaning, right? You declutter your house. It's like
yeah.
once you've decluttered, you don't have this stressful thing about what do I need to put instead now that I've
Mm,
taken out the stuff that wasn't needed. Like what's
yeah.
wrong with just so everyone's obsessed with the replacement thing, and I'm saying there's no there's no need to replace anything, right? What's it? Why do you? Because there's just this deeply inbuilt assumption that we can't just be people.
Mm,
We can't just be people. We have to have something
yeah.
that constrains or defines us and the other. But I just don't
Yeah.
understand why. There's no reason for it. There's no reason because it's not. We're not saying that there isn't such a thing that is true and just and fair and good and all of these. But let's have conversations about that. Therefore,
Mm,
when we notice goodness or wisdom or truth or whatever, when the first question to ask
yeah.
is not, well, who is the person? What's their background? What's their ethnic this or that, whatever? What traditional scripture is that coming from? I mean, these are not primary questions. Primary questions is I
Mm,
recognize something. I recognize goodness, and God
mm,
recognizes goodness, if you want to put it that way,
yeah.
right? And you
Yeah.
know what's evil and wrong or immoral, and you recognize that.
Yeah.
Remember, a lot of this is about being in the here and now in the present, and being with God in the present, and
Mm,
trusting our intuitions and working off those, right? And creatively trying to move and energetically move our situations forward in a productive way. For the vast majority of what we need to know in order to do that, we don't have to identify ourselves, right? We don't have to like go here, there, and everywhere. We don't have to ask scholar X or Y. To crack on. Just do,
yeah.
just do, it's mostly very common sense. And the point about common
Yeah.
sense is that in a society, you individual senses get refined into with the common sense. So there's a public engagement or conversation or debate, right? In order
Yeah.
for then things to progress. So all I'm saying is it's just not necessary. I mean, I've been functioning like in this way for a while. Like it's just not needed. I haven't needed it. I haven't felt it required to. Oh my God, like, who am I? Who am I? Like what am I going to say? Well, what would you say if someone says, like I said in one of the episodes? Well, why is that? It's just I mean, it doesn't matter. Let's change the question.
Yeah. Yeah. So I see what you're saying. I mean, I think it really applies in the sort of public context
Why?
when well, let me let me
Sorry.
kind of get to my question. So, you know, if in terms of public engagement, in terms of um collaborating and working with others for common goodness, common virtues, common morality, right? I think that what you're saying, yes, it makes sense. It doesn't really matter who or I guess, quote unquote, what religion the person follows or believes in, or what their concept of God is, or how they connect with God, or any of that stuff, right? Or how they live their life. It's like if there's an issue at hand where something needs to be resolved, some problem needs to be addressed, we can all work together just fine, regardless of any of the identity sort of stuff there. But I think that on a personal level, though, the identity I think is quite relevant when it comes to our day to day lives. So I guess the
But
question
but
is,
why? I don't know. Can you please explain that for me? Why is that important?
well,
Because I really don't get
so
it.
let me, yeah, well, so let me ask you. So, like, in terms of the average Muslim, right? Like, let's just, in terms of just for the sake of reference, like, let's just use these terms. What tangible problem would you say abandoning the label quote unquote Muslim solves? How would the average um, Muslim's life improve? And because again, the discussion still at a personal level still feels a bit abstract or
No, but why?
disconnected
No, but
from
look,
lived
but the thing is,
reality.
yeah, but no, but it's not.
Um,
Look, but
and yeah,
you mentioned Islamophobia. There would be no Islamophobia if there
yeah.
was no concept of Islam. You want to solve Islamophobia? Solve it.
Well,
That is literally that's literally solved. Like if you take off the first part, there's just phobia left, right? No, but honestly, think
well,
about it for a second,
yeah,
because what are they targeting? They're targeting an identity. It's easy to target identities. It's easy to kind of think,
mm,
right, and target those people who can find themselves in that particular way, and then to kind of demonize and do whatever you ought them to do. I mean, even on a purely pragmatic and strategic basis, if you drop this, who and what they're going to target, it's like chasing a ghost. What are you targeting now precisely? And as we said before, it's
mm,
like, and if it's people going around just saying who feel the love of God deeply and they feel committed to God, meaning that they're trying to do the right thing, um, not pursue kind of lower objectives in life, right? Try to become optimal people essentially and live upright
Mm.
lives. You go about and just do that, right? You do that as a citizen of your your relevant kind of country, whatever. You crack on, right? And within your sphere of influence, you just do good and try and maintain a healthy, upright, righteous life. Okay,
Mm.
you don't need to carry anything along with that, right? You can derive your wisdom and your inputs and your kind of learnings from wherever you want to kind of get them from, frankly, right? And you just get on and as a contributing citizen to whatever your policy is. Like what? So that's
So
one use.
on,
That's
yeah.
one benefit. The other benefit is this is the point. It's like religion is a very like when you have it in this is my religion. Remember what we said before. There's a big important psychological difference between right. I'm doing what I'm doing because my religion says to do it, versus I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm devoted to God. So there's a big difference between psychology. You want a benefit? We've talked about it already. That's a huge benefit, right? Huge benefit.
Mm.
A lady who covers her hair and dresses modestly, right? What, to follow a rule, right?
Mm.
Because she's Muslim? No, no, no. Well, how about you internalize it as that 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 modesty is a principle that is reflective of like alignment with the divine reality in a social context, right? Is an upright, noble way to be. And I then make a judgment about how I dress and present myself in public because of that. And
Mm.
interestingly, that then becomes a value that anybody you can promote in society, generally speaking.
Right.
Now you're not
Yeah.
waiting as a so-called Muslim for everyone to become Muslim before they dress in a way that you think is correct. Rather, you can say, no, there's a principle of modesty that is a universal principle that has benefits, whose the absence of which, the harms of which are known and can be felt and experienced. And anybody can understand that, right? And anybody can relate to that, and anybody can come on board. You can achieve a more modest society over time, a healthier society, a more internally connected sort of society, a more just society, right? Any of these again principles, without getting into is it more Islamic, Muslim, or whatever. In fact, that the more you do that, the less likely you are to achieve the actual fundamental outcomes that God wants to see, if you want to use that language, right? So that's a
Mm.
huge benefit because now you're just presenting it on the basis of like something shared, right? As soon as you have the Muslim label, you have the non-Muslim sees you as the Muslim, right? It's coming from a framework that already feels alien, already feels foreign, right? Even if you take the Arabic out of it, actually, to be honest, in a sort of capitalized sense, because you're not speaking at this existential lowest common denominator level, person to person, with a shared context and a shared culture, right? With the social
Mm.
capital with your fellow human being, right? In a way that they can
Yeah.
understand, where they're receiving it in that way. So our job is to lower the job of anybody who wants to achieve goodness, right? Is to
Yeah.
lower the barrier to entry and to understanding into that goodness,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so erecting these labels and these kind of rigid kind of things, and then religion as a separate category that you kind of come into or come out of, or you're religious or irreligious, right? And Muslim or non-Muslim, whatever. They're like completely irrelevant and unhelpful barriers to achieve the actual existential things that we're supposed to be achieving. So yeah, like the prevention of that harm, I think is significant, and therefore it comes down to this idea of universal access to God and meaning. Comes down to this idea of like truth seeking over like just identity obsession. And the points I'm making here are not particular, as I said before, they're not particular to Islam Muslim. They're particular to any religious label and any named religion. They're also particular to any type of labeling, capitalized labeling, that creates a division that doesn't allow people to discuss things at the substantial level, right? Where fundamental issues that affect people en masse across society become political footballs because the Republicans say this and the Democrats say that, and because we're Democrats this, and because the Republicans that, not because this is what's needed, right? But rigidly sticking to certain things because of, right? And so failing
Yeah.
to see the overlaps, failing to cooperate,
Yeah.
therefore, failing to collaborate. It's common sense. It's a basic, right? We all know,
Yeah.
we all as citizens suffer from this kind of nonsense, right? When in governance, when
Mm.
it goes wrong that way, but it's suffering from the same problem. Identity, like these capitalized identities that make things
Yeah.
rigid, tribal, and everyone suffers.
So you mentioned a few times capitalized labels, and you also mentioned in this example of a woman explaining regarding why she wears the hijab, the
Why she
headscarf.
wears it?
And
Yeah, which is not the hijab, of course.
yeah, No, I understand. Yes, but I'm just
Well, no,
common
but then
speak, right?
no, but the point is to change common speak. The
Sure, sure.
hijab is
Okay,
not the
fair enough.
headscarf by any stretch.
I
This
know.
is a
I,
complete
I
misunderstanding.
understand. So dressing modestly, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And yeah, I agree with you in terms of like the hijab referring to much more than just one of the parts of covering or modesty. But nonetheless, you mentioned that um, the answer would not be, oh, because I'm a Muslim or because this is what the Quran says or God says, but oh, because I'm devoted to God, right? Which is Islam,
It's not even
lowercase
devoted to
I.
God. You can
That's,
take it out of devoted to God even. I want to be a modest person.
yeah,
Modesty is a good thing. Why do I think modesty is a good thing? Right? So what I'm trying to say is you could just
yeah,
come out of the framework of command. Come out of that framework of command. It's because these random commands which we just can't intuit are just dropping from here and there, right? No, just leave that a second. Leave that a second, right? And just say, like, somebody has internalized the fact of being like it's like you internalize kindness. Okay. So you internalize kindness. You don't every time now you have to think of a particular verse or narration or some rule for kindness. You just become a
yeah,
kind person. You practice kindness
yeah,
and you become kind.
right.
You practice modesty and you practice humility and you become a modest or humble person. Like this, it's just
Mm.
super basic. I don't need this whole detailed like textual framework to support these really simple ideas. Those the thing that everybody's missing, or not everybody, but is commonly missed, is the fact that the textual frameworks that people go back to, the sources that they're going back to kind of warrant or to explain or to understand basic common sense things about goodness and justice and everything else. What they're missing is the fact that those things are manifestations of those underlying principles.
Yeah,
Our job is to manifest the underlying principles in our context. And if we look back and we look at these sources to understand them as manifestations, not the principles in and of themselves,
mm,
right? It's a local manifestation. That's why the prophetic example is a local manifestation, a local maximum of what can be achieved in a certain context, in a certain culture, in a certain linguistic framework with its particular dynamics. Okay. And scripture reflects that. It reflects the prophetic psychology, the prophetic experience, the prophetic story, and therefore his community story. Okay.
mm,
We need to look at it in a way that's reflective of that. Right. And a
mm,
significant part of what we learn from that, if we look at it very carefully in that context, right, it is very, very clear, okay, that one of the basic necessities, if you want to honor anything to do with prophetic legacy, is to use
mm,
is to leverage the language and the culture of people to be relatable and to have a universal concern. It's really as
right.
simple as that. Like it's so simple. Like, look, you and I would know, right? If it had been the case that a prophet had emerged in an English-speaking place or nation, historically or today, there isn't not every single word in any kind of revelatory thing would be in English. And it might be derivatives and this, that, but they would be in common English in relation to parts of the day, right?
Yeah,
And when it's trying to relate these fundamental states like
mm,
devotion, like hypocrisy, like denial, like, faith or whatever, right? That's it. That's it. These are the English words. Let's just use these English words. And these are lowercase
yeah,
terms. And there's no evidence to suggest, obviously, that
yeah,
necessarily these things in the Quran should be capitalized because, as we know, there's no capital letters
yeah,
anyway.
yeah. So I am 100%. I'm pretty much 100% on board with you on this point,
But I don't see how you
right?
can be 100% on board on this point, but then also kind of like not, like sort of, yeah, like not see the, like, I don't know, still maintain this necessity to keep something, to have a label, to have
Yeah,
a sort of a descriptor that constrains.
yeah.
I really don't get that one.
So yeah, we're gonna get to that now. I feel like you're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as the phrase goes, right?
I'm not. I'm not.
Because if like
That
I
baby's getting love, man.
so I think I mentioned this even in like the first couple episodes that again, there's basically two steps that I feel like the first step is essentially everything that you just mentioned, or most of what you just mentioned, which is
Mm,
again, meaning, understanding,
okay.
English, right? And just meaningful, and yeah, and understanding the principles and the lowercase, right, versions, etc. All of that, again, I think many people would be very receptive to that and are receptive to that. However, when you say, oh, leave the label altogether, that's where I think it's a big question because number one, like, so there's several points here we can discuss. So let's go through them one by one.
Hmm.
One point is that, um, you know, when we talk about devotion, right? Devotion to God. Okay. The question is, according to whose standard are you going to look at that devotion to God, right? Because people, it's very subjective. One will say, "Oh, I devote myself to God this way." One will say, "I devote myself to God this way." Even when you talked about modesty, right? Just this example of modesty, who will decide what modest actually is,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Because one person will say, "Oh, modest is covering my face and my whole
Yes.
body." Some will say, "No, everything
Yeah.
other than covering my face."
Hmm.
And then some will say, "No, no, actually, I don't need to cover my hair.
Yeah.
I'll just cover my chest and my
Right.
neck." Some will
Yeah.
say, "Actually, no, I don't think you don't need to do that. I can
Uh-huh.
wear pants or jeans or whatever," right? Obviously,
Yeah.
for a lot of this is in the context of women, but even when
Hmm.
it comes to men, right?
Hmm.
Someone will say, "Oh, yeah, I mean, I can wear the shorter shorts I want to wear,"
Sure.
or
Yeah.
that's completely fine. That's modest to me. So it's so subjective, which is why, of course, divine guidance is there, right? And so that gives you the sort
But
of
even
objective
yes,
measure.
okay, no, but that's the
Yeah.
thing. It's not an objective. It's not. That's the point. It is not. This is the grave misunderstanding, right? Quranic verses are not universal, timeless, objective measures for everybody to hold themselves to forevermore. I mean, who said, right? Frankly, because look, think about it. Yeah, take this issue to do with modesty, right? The very fact that there were several years before certain things were even um, inspired to the messenger, before he conveyed these things, right? Suggests something very critical and important and obvious. In fact, it is common sense, which is to say that it's not this kind of objective standard as a rule that sits up here, right? That is kind of regardless of what is going on is the standard. The very fact that it wasn't there for a certain period of time, and clearly you can see comes in response to particular situations, right? Because of particular situations, a certain, right? All these verses are coming in response to situations, whether that's a psychological prophetic anxiety or experience and addressing that, whether that's a question that he is receiving, whether that's a problem that's trying to be solved, and inspiration is flowing to deal with the issues in a wise way at that time. That is not that. So that's what I'm saying. The principle is a wisdom to achieve a certain outcome at the right time, right? The specific outcome that is conveyed at a particular point in time cannot be, right? Exactly the thing that is to be said now forevermore, regardless of any other context. That defies all common sense, right? That's literally like saying that, that it makes sense that for a particular law comes in in any place, right? A particular law comes in a particular time, and it's just forevermore. That law cannot be changed. So when you say who decides, the people decide. That's why you have processes through which these things get done, right? That's why the human beings as a collective achieve a certain status quo at a particular point in time with regards to how their common space is to be governed. Things happen, effects take place, harms are felt, benefits are felt. There's a social discussion and negotiation through the various channels through which these things take place. And if there are good governance frameworks, then better outcomes are realized over time. I was speaking to a friend earlier today, and I was explaining, we were discussing some related matters to this. I said to him, in the UK recently, there was this smoking and vapes bill or ban or whatever that came in, which says that, I think something like, you know, anybody born after a certain year, will now it will be forever illegal for them to buy cigarettes in the UK,
Mhm.
right? Legally. Okay. Now, that is a good example of something which I would say is a positive outcome, right? We would say that's a positive outcome. It's coming at a particular point in time, given the context here and now, right? So the point being is, in the future, that may change. Something may change, be adapted, built upon. It's a living tradition. It's a living legal system, okay? And frankly speaking, my view on this now, just to kind of put it in there maybe for another time, is that what self-identifying Muslims need to understand, and as we've touched on briefly, and I've spoken about in different discussions as well, is that there is no such thing as the Muslim community that is an actual effective polity, right? That has a governance framework and a financial framework that makes it a community. Our only polity, in truth, right, is the nation state within which we function. That's just the current reality. I'm not saying that's good or bad, right? And I actually do believe the nation states will come to an end one day, probably this century. But the point being is that that's what we're in. That's where we pay our taxes. That's where the rules and the laws that we are governed by, right, exist and function. So that's the space in which we should bring our influence, right? Now you tell me, think about it, right? if people have a genuine concern for the problems of alcoholism in the society that they're in, there is, in my mind, there's absolutely no need whatsoever to look at the Quran to go and figure out what the next best thing, the right thing to do right now is to go and deal with that problem. None. There's none. Why? Because what the revelation is reflecting, okay, is what that trajectory looked like. Well, it was appropriate for 7th century Arabia, right? It is not appropriate. So then, what's the underlying principle? That substance abuse is harmful, right? You don't want to mess with the kind of the mind and the intellect, and and gradualism, right? But these are common sense. These are common sense, right? The people who came behind and inputted into the smoking and vapes thing, they weren't looking at scriptures and prophets and saints and histories of A, B, C, D, E, F, G to kind of figure out like how to just deal something that's staring in the face as a problem, because they're reacting to the situation just as the prophet was reacting to his situation.
So I feel like the examples you've chosen to highlight are perhaps more black and white, where the harms of these things are more apparent. Alcohol, for example, is harmful to oneself, harmful to others.
What's an example of something where the harm is not
right,
so apparent, but needs to be dealt with?
A couple of examples would be consuming pork, right? The consumption of pork. Another example might be the hijab, right? Or let's say the khimar, or however you want to refer to it, essentially modesty, right?
Yeah, that's like one. No, come on, the latter one. How is it? How can it possibly be said that the like this is so interesting you brought this up, because, and we've discussed it, because I've been thinking about that issue for a while, right? And I used to think to myself, okay, look, is there a natural, rational, bottom-up case that can be made universally, the case for modesty? And of course, 110%.
No, modesty, yes, but modesty is a general term.
No, it's a general term, but I'm
specifics. That's where the issue is, right?
Fazan, the point is this: if you want to bring about a change in society, right, exactly to the point, like the current context that exists is the prime input into what the wise next thing to do is. Yeah. So how are things right now? If things are on basically on borderline frigging nakedness, right? Then we need then the right thing to do is to think about, okay, what's the overall picture of what you're trying to say? Why is this level of bearing oneself a problem? We have to think very carefully about that. And by the way, by doing that, we are not sidestepping the divine framework. We're actually understanding the divine framework, because all of these things are intelligible. God doesn't just do things just randomly, or just like in vain, or in a way that's like, remember that the cosmic order, if you want to say, is integrated, right? Like, is pervasive everywhere, right? So if we deviate from it, there will be problems, right? And these issues are very much connected to, right, the way in which then women are objectified, the harms that causes, relationship issues, family breakdowns, OnlyFans, right? Like the mental health effects. It's a very simple, it's an easy case to make, in fact, but we just don't make it. That's so interesting, right? It's so interesting, right? If you observe the fact that I am not personally aware of a significant movement by, again, self-identified Muslims who supposedly care about this issue. Where is the case being made for this? Why are you not making a moral case in society? And it's precisely, going back to the main issue that we're discussing, because of the label, the conception. Muslims don't think that the non-Muslim is kind of subject to the rules because they're not Muslim yet. What a nonsense. What a nonsense, right? This is so important. Now, modesty is a rule, right, that you follow if you're Muslim, rather than modesty is a natural reflection of a closer alignment to God. And everybody it's possible for them to align closer or further away from the divine. Everybody already is. That's already the case, right? And what we said last time, it's not for us to make a whole judgment about where this person is or isn't. It's better as a starting point to make an assumption that everybody's interested in living the best life they can possibly. But on the way, they're making issues, they have misunderstandings. Okay, fine. Well, help then. But help in a way that speaks to them. Don't take them back through history, right? Speak to them in the situation now and take them to a future. That's it, right? And then the things that we say are going to be reflective of those principles, and therefore would do the prophet proud. But the way we're doing it right now is just causing a disappointment. And so we can sallallahu alayhi all day long, right? But the sallallahu alayhi is to do what I'm saying. It's not to say sallallahu alayhi and feel like I've got some magic blessings. It's not, right? It's to do the thing that he would have done. And this is exactly what he would have done.
Yeah. I guess one question remains, which is what is the ideal? So I understand everything you said in terms of the direction we want to move people in and make the logical case at a societal level, and whatnot, just based on uh, the apparent harms of not being modest at different levels, like you said. But is there an ideal, meaning that okay, we want to move people in this direction, but the ideal
No,
is
there are
to
local
for a
ideals.
woman or
There's no
whoever.
absolute ideals.
Or,
There's no absolute ideals.
mm,
There are local ideals, and the local ideals are also relative to a result. Okay, is it achieving the function? Is it achieving the function? It's very important. Um, law,
so
law,
just to yeah.
laws and rules come in to achieve something, not just random. It's not the piety. The piety is not in just following the rule, like with no sense or context. The piety is in adopting a practice that achieves an outcome, right? That brings
Mm,
you and others closer to where it needs to get to. So the question basically is that if, for example, taking the example that we elaborated, now actually there's a society of more stable families, or dignified kind of a more dignified kind of culture, right? More
mm,
respect. Women feel respected. Women don't feel objectified. Men treat women with respect. Um, and uh, and pornography is not something that people even want incline towards, right? It doesn't have to. It's not even. It's not. It's not that it becomes illegal, but it's people like they're not inclined towards it because they are in satisfying relationships, etc. Now, look, of course, people are people. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to deviate, right? We all sin and err and mess up and whatever. What I'm trying to say is that the culture can move there, right? So what I'm trying, like, that's how you know. Now, what that looks like, frankly speaking, like, yeah, what that looks like in terms of what's the particular thing that looks like, of how everybody would be clothed in order to achieve such an outcome. I don't know, but it doesn't matter that I don't know or that nobody knows. Like that's part of what we're going to go figure out. But even the prophet didn't know at the beginning of his journey what that's going to look like, or every rule that's going to come about or not come about. But the really important thing to appreciate: local maximum, local ideals, right? A local
yeah,
manifestation of universal principles. Okay,
yeah,
so our like, there's no end point to this game because problems will always surface, right? It's like whack-a-mole,
right,
right? You want some issue, right? If
yeah.
the life of the prophet, peace be upon him, had continued for another 20 years, you'd have another 20 years worth of problems and solutions. It would have continued. And then, so interesting, this akmaltu lakum dinakum, the completion of deen, therefore, okay,
Yeah.
that is in the context of, it's not completion of the deen forevermore, like where all the rules and that now everything's done, and the only thing that everybody ever needs to do now is just go look back at what happened in this 23 years and just go take that chapter and verse and just apply it. No, it's a local completion, right, of a story, right? It completes
Mm,
that story, but clearly, even when he passed away, the ikmal of the deen had not taken place on most places on earth in any sense, as far as that story is concerned. But that's something. It's an ongoing process. It would have continued to be an ongoing process had he lived on, because some other drama,
mm,
some other issue, right, some other kind of whatever, like thing would have come up. So it's a constant renewal, or a constant local, within, again, the relevant kind of group, polity, etc. space, um, to achieve the outcomes across the board that need to be achieved. And honestly, when you strip this down and um, and remove these unnecessary ways of thinking and labels and attachments of just completely, certainly as things are right now, and in our context, because people sometimes say one of the things is, oh, well, did all the scholars miss this for 1400 years? But the reality is, why does that matter? They're not accountable for what we're going to do. We're not accountable for what they did. I mean, I don't actually particularly care, actually. Why should I care? I'm staring at a situation here in front of my face now, right now. I can, right? You see issues here and now. It's a problem that people are, spiritually disconnected, practicing the ways that feel unfitted, don't have confidence in their self. People just generally just don't know what they're doing here on earth, right? People are pursuing all sorts of
mm,
like lower end goals, right? And you have like an economic, political, and whatever situation. There's a disaster, technological threats that are looming over all of us, environmental catastrophe. Like, I don't need to understand what Imam X said from the 15th century. I just need to look at
yeah.
this situation, try to do some good stuff, and find you. But in doing good stuff, you find your tribe of other people trying to do good stuff, and get on with it. And then keep centering yourself, right? Keep centering yourself by connecting, okay, to the divine in a way that affords you the courage and the humility and all the good stuff that enables you to go back into the arena and make things happen. I don't see what is more prophetic, more simple, more beautiful, more universal, more unifying than what I'm saying. I like there's zero downside and all upside.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So just to go back a little bit before we continue, like for women specifically, or in the context of women, when it comes to, again, I know we're constantly coming back to this example, but maybe this will be the last question on it. You know, if you're speaking to your daughter or the women or the girls in the community, let's say, right?
Hmm.
And I know you are objecting to this term of community referring to Muslims only.
Yeah.
But let's just say even in general, yeah, I guess people will still have a question of what is the ideal modest, like what is the ideal level of modesty look like, right? And that's not it's not kind of a superficial question. It's more of a question of, hey, what do we think is closest to the morals, the morality that God has set or
Yeah,
sent down or
sure.
revealed, right? So one will say, like I said, again, it's subjective at that level. So how do you address that still? I mean, you know,
Well, look, the thing, well,
someone
look,
wearing a
look,
headscarf versus someone not wearing a
yeah,
headscarf,
but the
right?
thing is, as you well know, even these topics are like even amongst the people who look at life and this particular issue through a particular framework, which is to say, oh, here are some prescriptions that God has sent down to, yeah, to or through his messenger to people, right, or to women, for example, in this case, in terms of how to dress in a way that is fitted and appropriate, right? Like, despite that shared kind of framework, I mean, Muslim women dress in all sorts of different ways. And there is no clear agreed upon standard. If you go into even the theoretical or technical components, right, there's not
Mm,
an agreed upon standard quite clearly.
mm.
Okay, so how has this kind of this conception of divine guidance clarified the situation particularly, right? It hasn't
I think
necessarily
there
because
is,
it's
I do think, I mean,
no, but
yeah,
what I'm
for what
saying,
I
but
understand,
it's quite varied. Like even theoretically, right? Theoretically, um uh there is uh a range of opinion about what is actually required and not required, right? What is
mm,
actually, and I'm not just talking about clothing, but every other aspect of,
yeah,
what you might say is, modesty, presentation, etc.,
right.
etc. Right? I'm just saying, look, we don't have to get. I really, I wasn't,
Yeah, I understand. I
didn't get
understand.
into the
Yeah,
details of this particular thing, right? But what I'm saying, there
yeah,
is a range. Okay,
yeah,
there's a range, and then in practice, of course, there's an even wider range, right? Why? Because a lot of
yeah.
people are also thinking about their particular context. Now, that's the interesting thing. When you look at on the theory, now to say, oh, back in some point in time, right, this was the theoretical range. Again, I will say, who cares? Because they were speaking their times and context. And this is a dynamic situation because you have to speak relative to the society that you're in, right? So are we going to say that a woman who carries herself modestly doesn't cover her hair, right, but covers the rest of her in a way that is relatively kind of modest, given the fact that nowadays, right, like especially in the summer and what have you, like almost complete nakedness, right,
Yeah.
is pervasive. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like relative to the situation, you will say, okay, this is a relatively modestly dressed woman who is conscientiously, and that's a key point
Mhm.
here, I think, is what's the
Yeah.
psychology of each individual that's involved. And that's the
Mm,
problem when we reduce everything to these rules, basically, you know,
mm,
the rules and kind of, again, a kind of a robotic, this is the rules, that this
yeah.
is what needs to be done, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, so I'm just saying, I don't think that we need to speak of like future theoretical ideals for each thing.
Mm,
I think what we can do is to convey why a certain approach might be useful relative to where people are at now. That might at least just take them on to the next stage, which again is what these verses were doing, right? For all sorts of topics, right? Which is why you have certain, depending on future situations, different things being said on all sorts of different topics. Yeah.
mhm,
So that's really what it is. That's really what it is.
mm,
It's like in one of the verses, for example, the comment in the commentaries and the understanding, it's quite clear that the particular issue, right, that is needed to be that is looking to be addressed, okay, is to do with the way in which it was the culture, and it would continue to be the culture for a period of time before the verse was even revealed. That's really important. Please understand, right? Like, the Prophet peace be upon him is functioning, companions there, all this stuff is going on, right? And the female companions, many of them are dressing in whatever way, frankly. Yeah. Right. And at some point, it comes to say, right, that from one of the verses, it's very clear that what's being addressed is, okay, that to cover your bosom, i.e., to prevent your cleavage showing in public. Now, Okay.
Mm.
So cleavage showing in public is obviously a super common thing nowadays, right? So it's like, if you want to make a case for this and you think that there's a social benefit in doing so and you're avoiding various social harms, which I agree that there is definitely a case to be made, absolutely a case to be made for all of this, um, then you do it relative to the current situation. But what you're not going, like, what it doesn't make sense to say, right? The Muslim argument for on a social or a national level today for how women should dress can't
Mm.
just be saying, well,
Of course,
like
yeah.
year 23, whatever prescriptions. Now, but if of course, and this is my point now, which is proving the point, right? Which is to
Mm.
say, it's our job just to achieve like better outcomes locally, and also to prioritize, because again, that's part and parcel of um, the methodology. And again, it's common sense methodology. It's not like something unique, right? You're trying to solve like multiple problems. Well, start with what you think is, the most, or the problems that are most fundamental, but go and address them
Mm.
and stop. But then
Yeah.
speak to your entire society. Don't simply
Mhm.
speak to the one community. I personally, I'm against this notion that, okay, there are Muslims who, once they become Muslim, they have a Sharia. Now they apply the Sharia, and this Sharia just doesn't apply to other people. And until they become Muslim, there's nothing to say to them. That
Right.
is not a fitted way to see things in today's day and age. It's
Yeah.
just the world has moved on,
I agree. I agree.
and
Yes.
we're still stuck in, I don't know where. Well, I'm not, but people are.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned earlier is certain things are common sense. And when things are happening at a societal level, people will be able to realize what's good and what's not based on the outcomes, and then essentially course correct until basically they reach perhaps the solution, or move towards a solution that is the godly, more moral kind of thing to do. But the problem maybe with that argument is there are many examples, whether it's in the Quran, of societies or even modern societies, where the course correction simply never happens.
The course
Where a
correction,
society,
no, that's not true, Fazan. The course correction will inevitably always happen, even if it takes a long time. And if it won't happen, it will be because one of two. It will basically because people are not alert to the harms. Okay, and so it takes people to stand up and course correct, make the point. Exactly, prophetic example, right?
Mhm.
If the prophet, peace be upon him, like the culture that the Arabs were living in at the time, like prior to or at the time of the prophetic mission, that culture had pre-existed for a long time. Yeah,
Mm.
said, and it's exactly the same thing. Certain people were disproportionately benefiting from the status quo and therefore maintaining the status quo, and the rest of the people were basically too afraid or too disempowered to do anything about it. Oh, doesn't that sound familiar? Right? So course correction
Yeah.
comes because people have some guts to go and do something. Or the harms just become so overwhelming that everybody realizes we had to do something. Right? Environmentally, course correction, right? You got to remember what we're doing. If you deviate from where you need to be, you cannot escape the consequences. وَمَا
Mm.
أَنْتُمْ بِمُعْجِزِينَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. It's very powerful. You can't escape on Earth, even later, right? Because the consequences of deviating from what is balanced will manifest themselves inevitably. Okay, so we take that kind of thing. Like, do we think that the fact that, okay, what if this crazy high percentage of women under a very young age are on OnlyFans? Do you think that like
Mm.
you don't like the harms of that are going to manifest themselves, right? Until people realize, right? Or people pay attention to the Nadir, the warner, and the Bashir, the one who gives a better alternative. So what I'm trying to say is, like, the more we talk about this, right? It's like, look at what we're saying. Exactly,
Yeah.
like it's the deepest manifestation of do what he would have done,
Mhm.
right? It is not true to say we cannot get away. If it's true, if the principles are true, we cannot escape them. That's why, you know, like, you cannot escape your inner experience. You can't escape the desolation, the emptiness, right? The depression, the anxiety, the fear. You can't escape it. If your life is on track, these things won't be there. But if life's not on track,
Mm.
these things will be there, even though it might look like it's on track,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So you can't escape it. And then it's all about, are you going to pay attention to the signals,
Mm.
or to the person who's pointing out what, that a problem is coming around the corner? Exactly as my friend, was talking to my friend today, when he was saying how this very famous kind of story and narration about the prophetic kind of call started with, if I was to tell you that an army coming to come and destroy you, would you believe me? Right?
Sure.
Look how relevant that is to what we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Now look, for example,
Absolutely.
like all these people who are out there right now, all these people out there, not Muslim, who are out there warning about the dangers of AI, warning about campaigning hard and taking very seriously the issues to do with the environmental situation out there, right? Dealing with whatever issue that they're dealing with. So social justice issue, whatever. This is all godly work, right? They're not waiting. They're not looking for, they're in their moment. They're doing their thing. They're responding to their internal conscience, which is the voice of the divine, and getting on with it. As far as I'm concerned, in Allah la yudi'u ajra al-muhsinin. God's not going to,
Mm.
that's not wasted. We discussed this last time, right? But my
Mm.
position, like, it's clear. How can all of that just be nothing? It's not nothing unless it's for
Yeah.
self-interest, unless it's for some arrogant imposition of ABC, whatever, right? Then you've got problems. But if it's selfless actions, doing good, just being normal and getting on and responding to your conscience in relation to an issue that's fitting your environment, and not confusing everybody with saying, well, let's go back X hundred years to go and figure out what the right thing to do is when it's staring us in the face. And and I'm just proposing based on my intuitions, and we develop a common sense about how to move forward. This is how
Mm.
to do life. So
Yeah.
that's what we need to do. And so course correction does happen, but it happens to the extent that we do what we need to do. And just one last thing, I was thinking about these verses today. I haven't thought about them for a long time. ولولا دفع الله ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض. Right? Had God not repelled or pushed back some people with others, the earth would have become corrupt. Right? So if you want to prevent corruption, be an agent of change, push back against the stuff that's causing the problems, and just get on with it.
Mm.
And stop getting into Islam, Muslim, non-Muslim, Islamic, ABC. Just deal with the issue, and deal with the issues affecting everybody, including yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the issues today is people just have their own problems. People have so much they're struggling with.
Okay, then
Many
solve your own
people are just
problems.
living
Yeah, fine.
paycheck to paycheck, and family problems, marital problems, personal problems, spiritual, problems, and whatnot, addictions, etc. And it's almost like, you know, what you're saying almost just seems like it's almost like a completely different way to go about life, which is like, hey, everyone has problems, but we need to almost focus on the outside problems, um and through solving those, perhaps your life will get better,
But I think the
versus, hey,
outside.
just
Oh
focus.
no, but
Yeah.
but one of the problems that we have all to solve is purposelessness, meaninglessness.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah.
it's the outside inside is a false binary,
Mm.
right? You
Yeah.
solve your existential problem of the meaning of your life by doing something
Yeah.
meaningful. Yeah. And if at a point in
Yeah.
time it is a particular, like, so just think about it. It's like, don't think about it as an individual human unit.
Mm.
Yeah. Think about it as a at the species level, at the collective level, right? You zoom up one and say, this is a whole collective. This is one collective, right?
Right.
Within that collective, different components or units will, at different moments, have its own things to deal with, so they can be relevant for the wider collective. But everybody knows that the objective is the collective, right? And the collective
Yeah.
experience, and their contribution into that collective experience. And by doing individual actions of purification and service and fixing and this and that, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Then one is also bringing oneself up to a level, or upgrading oneself to a level that allows to be more beneficial, sort of subsequently. But it's a mix of things, right? Like we're all dealing with personal stuff while trying to deal with all this other stuff. But I'm just saying that we don't need to make the distinction, I would say, between this and that.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying these other
I
things
see.
don't need addressing. They need addressing, but it's just another issue amongst
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. Yeah. One reflection that I had on what you just mentioned about the Prophet, peace be upon him, and how he said, if I told you this, would you believe me? And they said yes. Uh, Someone once said that he had a reputation before revelation,
Mm.
where he was from amongst his people. And he said, essentially, yeah, so that was his people. And I feel like when we say my people, we're actually thinking about Muslims. We're not thinking about the US or the UK. And I think
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. And I
Yes.
also think that the, reputation, i.e., comes from relationships and I guess being with people as people and just, yeah, I mean, just being from amongst the people, right? And, your neighbors and your people that you see at the grocery store, at the park, or whoever else, you have regular interactions with, I think that's also a very, um, foundational step that needs to take place. It goes back to something we discussed in a previous session about the way we look at people shouldn't be based on labels or based on or assumption of guilt. Oh, Muslim, kafir, almost like
Mm,
this Muslim, non-Muslim type of
sure.
approach, but rather just seeing people at a human level and just, yeah, I think that's also an issue.
And seeing yourself that way. And the point being is, this
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
thing. I see. See, you're always saying this thing about like there's two steps. Oh, the one step is to anglicize and do this and not have this particular transliterated label. Oh, but that's fine. But the second step is a problem. But it's like
Yeah.
just do the first step. There is no second step, and then you're okay. And then just keep walking. Like as in,
Yeah.
there's no, there's no, there's no. You have to. That's what I'm saying. You don't need to replace the thing
Hmm.
like with anything as an identity marker. I am X, I am Y. What
Mm.
you replace, as we said,
Yeah.
let's replace nouns with adjectives and or verbs, let's say, right? This is what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do. This is how I'm trying to live my life. Yeah, I draw
Hmm.
inspiration from this particular. I think that, that I think that the Muhammadan example is a very powerful example. I draw inspiration from that. But I'm not
Hmm.
drawing inspiration from it in such a way that is like, or relating to it in such a way that is basically completely destroying my ability to think, to be creative, to frankly to take risk, right, in achieving good outcomes in the here and now. Like where common sense gets destroyed, right, and relationships get all fuzzy and messy, and then you have all
Yeah.
this nonsense, and this is the irony, absolutely playing into, right, like giving all of the ammunition, right, for like to be on the receiving end of bigotry and prejudice and this and whatever. Like you're literally, in that sense, you're the problem.
Hmm.
Like as in, why are you presenting yourself in this way in the first place? Yeah, I'm not saying
Yeah.
this is an excuse, but I'm saying like for any form of looking down on bigotry or whatever, because what I'm communicating are principles that apply to anybody, right? Um,
Mm. But just
but the
because
point,
a category or
but this
sorry, go
dominance.
ahead.
No, but I'm just saying this dominance kind of mentality by whoever, right?
Yeah.
Which is vested in a label,
Right.
right, or a fixed marker of some sort, and that applies with, as we said, to issues of race, ethnicity, your political persuasions, right, your religious labeling or identity. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense because it
Mm.
all covers up, right. Again, what is good, what is true, what is wise, what is just, what is fair, what is beautiful,
Mm.
what just makes sense, what's needed right now to move forward, and that's
Yeah.
an ongoing debate, right? An ongoing debate which requires constant adjustment and realignment, just as driving on the road
Mm.
requires constant concentration, right? And you just keep going. And in a sense, there's no arrival. There's just you get too tired, right? And then your body goes, and then basically, right, you can't drive. And as long as you're driving towards the destination, that's all that matters. And the promised land
Mm.
is not like, as in that's something which um uh, with the ups and downs, evolves, over time and goes and then, well, we'll get to a philosophy of paradise later. But the point being is like, that's some like you're going towards a promised land. That's it. Just travel
Yeah.
towards a promise. So what is heaven on earth? What does that look like? What's the best outcome? What's
Mhm.
balance? What's, um, brings the best outcomes? And just you're trying to move towards that. And that is as simple. It's as simple as that.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, so on this, you said, well, it's kind of your own fault, but if a certain label or category is being abused or is being vilified or whatever, um, the logical approach or the non-Iqbal approach, the typical approach would be, hey,
Why are you saying
let's
my approach is not
clarify.
logical?
No, 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 that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's uncommon and it's unique, right? So unique ball, right? Unique ball. So anyway, so what I'm saying
Okay,
is
all
that,
right.
the typical person would say, or the typical response perhaps would be, hey, let's clarify to people this label, right? People have fear around Islam and Muslims or whatever. Let's actually clarify to people. what these things mean, what Islam actually teaches versus what it's not
No,
teaching,
see, look what you just
etc.
said. What Islam actually teaches. Islam doesn't teach
Right.
anything. That's my point. There is no
Yeah.
clarifying what it is. There is clarifying that it isn't a thing.
Mm. Yeah.
That's the whole point. You can't. Islam doesn't teach anything. How I taught you nothing, right? Islam doesn't teach anything, right?
Yeah.
Submission to God is not what teaches you. Submission to God is what you're supposed to do, right? And there is no object. There is no thing that you can name that is fixed called Islam that has all the answers. Devotion to God is a way of being that is going to be a constant dynamic process of figuring out what the outcomes and the things are. So if you just say to them, we can just have a collective apology, right? And just say, we're really
Yeah.
sorry. Actually, we got confused for a couple of 100 years, right? And actually, like,
Yeah.
actually, no, forget all this Islam Muslim stuff. You're right. It doesn't exist. It's fine, right? But what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to be, just decent people, good citizens, godly, right? And really apply our conscience at the deepest level to all the issues that affect us and work together with anyone and everyone to achieve the best outcomes. Yeah. We're really sorry. Just
So
had
what
a
if someone says
just
like,
a slight detour, right?
what?
And we'll have
Yeah.
happy to draw on historic and contemporary, sources of information and wisdom and what have you, right? To move our situation forward in the here and now. Okay, bang. Extend my hand. Let's work together. Done. Right? And everyone's like, okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine. So that's fine then. I like, what's the problem? You drop everything. Like, you just problem solved. I literally problem solved.
So what if someone says that just sounds like more of an inferiority complex?
Yeah,
You
good.
know,
I'm glad you mentioned that because people are kind of, I kind of, you know, uh, despite my ability to live in some sort of Zen mode, right? Like when people start to come up with this stuff, right? I start to get a little bit itchy, right? Like the Hulk, stage one of the Hulk transformation begins. Look, okay, no, it is not an inferiority complex. Yeah, it's not a complex. In fact, right? It's not. It's none of the above, right? Or it is simply a way to try a way a proposition to help us orient ourselves in a way to try to achieve best outcomes for all people. That's not the point about it. Is that, see, inferiority and superiority? This thinking comes in when you're seeing again an in-group and an out-group. The Muslims in the West, you know. So you've got or Muslims and white people, because this is whether like this is in the mind of so many, if not most, Muslims.
yeah,
This is the division, right? Whereas in
right.
reality, it just makes no damn sense. Okay, so the thing is that so there's an inferiority. Oh, post-colonial like I'm suffering post-colonial trauma apparently. Well, I don't even think about these. Like, these are not relevant things to me, right? Like, I'm not like, it's kind of, if you think about the people who go on about these things, they're the ones who've got the inferiority complex, because it's like you feel a sense of weakness, and from your position of weakness relative to this wider thing, instead of you seeing yourself as part and parcel of a broader society, right? And fully, like, yeah, just in it as with everybody else, right? And accepting your current reality as it is, and then getting on and trying to get the best outcomes going forward. Sure, there's going to be injustice and issues and what have you to push back on. So go push back, go deal with them, right? Go work on them, but don't insert these arbitrary kind of things to get in the way. So I don't really get this one about, this is like inferiority or something about like yielding to the West or whatever. I'm talking like, as I said, I honestly think this is how you move. This is how you help people move to a greater level of consciousness, to a greater level of. And the irony of all of this is that it's almost just because of the way in which prophetic example is being related to as a way to guide, and the way, in my opinion, how that is so mixed up and just confused and confusing. The sad irony is that, frankly, right now, the less people thought about it, the more likely you would be to actually honor it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. So one of the issues, there's kind of a internal issue and then an external issue that I see based
Well,
on
there's no
some of
internal
the
or
things you
external.
said. I know.
But then, if you
But
know, then
again,
let's seriously rephrase the question. I'm going to accept
no,
this
no.
question.
So you'll understand
Not
why
accept
I'm
it.
saying that as I say again,
Okay, go on.
you have to just based on the reality on the ground, right? So this whole thing of 1400 plus years of scholarship,
Hmm.
of thinking, etc., the tradition, so to speak. Um, it's like if you are proposing to leave a label that has existed for over 1,000 years, that's been used in the context of, hey, we are Muslims, this is the religion of Islam, right? That has been the case. And there are non-Muslims. These are all labels again that have been used over the centuries.
I don't
So
agree that's the
if
case, by
you
the way. I don't think that's not, no, but sorry, the premise of the question is wrong. Like, that's not necessarily the
okay,
case. And first of all, we're talking in English. So it doesn't, again, I don't care what's happened in Kurdish and Turkish and this and that and Malay, and it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to me,
mm,
right? What's relevant
mhm,
is how has it been in the English language? And then what can it look like going forward? That's our context.
mhm,
That's what's relevant to us. Like, I
okay,
really don't see I don't see what the kind of, and as we have well discussed, I mean, forget all the history. We've done an extensive run through of how these terms in the revelation itself, at the time of the prophet peace be upon him,
yeah,
are clearly referring to like just
yeah,
lowercase states, like devotion, like submission, like whatever.
yeah.
So frankly, the rest of the history is kind of neither here nor there for me. Like, I don't see
Well,
why that's relevant.
well, the objection to that is, well, are there scholars? And I mean, you might say, well, it's irrelevant, but you know, should there not be a precedent of somebody or some people in the
Yeah, the
past
precedent
who
is a
have looked
prophetic
at the
example.
Quran?
That's good enough for
No,
me. The prophetic
mm,
example in the revelation is a good enough precedent for me. Like, I'm happy with that. Why are you going to go
mm.
to a random scholar?
Well, what I mean is like, how did everyone miss this? And like,
But I don't
like
know. But
because
it's an
you
assumption
ref
that they missed. Who said that they missed it in Arabic? Who missed it when they were in Arabic historically? Only recently in Arabic. It's very recent in Arabic that you'll see غير مسلمين or غير Muslim to
yeah.
describe the non-Muslim or non-Muslims because they have adopted this way of thinking. But that historically that's not the
Or
case.
what I mean is like the interpretation of verses like Inna Dina Indallahi Islam and others that we've looked at.
Yeah,
Even in translations now, you see that there's the capital I Islam being
sure.
mentioned or capital
Yes,
M
because they're
Muslims.
exactly because in the
So,
English language, yes, exactly because these translators are translating into English. We're doing it in an English language context where these things had been so like ingrained that yes, even they missed it.
mm,
Absolutely, they missed it. And so I don't. That's
I
not
see.
whatever. They did their best and they messed up. It's fine.
Mm, okay, fair enough. I guess then the question still it remains, which is that by proposing not to have a label, are you not simply creating another label, which is no
But I
label
haven't.
Muslim, basically?
No.
No, what I mean, no, what I mean is that so what's going to happen is that if it's not adopted by quote unquote the Muslim community, right? And
But
it's
there's no.
just
Yeah,
so yeah,
go
so
on.
I'm just saying like if it's not adopted, then you'll basically have, oh, here are the Muslims who do go by capital M Muslims, capital Islam, and then here are these quote unquote more progressive Muslims who don't identify as Muslims, even though they are Muslims. You know
But
what I
then
mean?
why?
So
Who?
there's kind of this like,
No, but they're not though.
you know,
There's no such thing as Muslims or Muslim community or any of this stuff. So all I'm saying is
so
that
I'm saying, well, are you not creating kind of,
what
there's this funny conversation within the context of madhabs, right? Where it's like, oh, by not following a madhab, are you creating a fifth madhab, which is to not follow madhab? Similarly, it's almost like you're creating this other category, which is, hey,
mm,
we're not going to categorize or label ourselves as this, even though pretty much, you know what I mean? It's almost like you're just creating a different category, a new category.
I don't think you're creating a new category or label because in all my discussions so far with you, I haven't felt the need to do so. I'm still representing all of the points in a way that I represent them to anybody. I'm literally doing what I'm saying we should do. I mean,
Yeah.
I
So
haven't
what I
like
mean, yeah,
if somebody wants to basically say, oh, ikhwal is an X. I mean, I think like the thing. Interestingly, no one said, oh, ikhwal is an X or a Y like in a capitalized sense. I mean, they might say he's deviant or ignorant, or on the one hand, or they'll say he's
mm,
inspired and sort of onto something on the other hand, right? But it's just like again, just normal sentences where
yeah,
people want to apply some sort of lowercase whatever. But I'm not. There's no named cult that we're trying to form here,
yeah,
right?
right, right.
I'm actually trying to restore basic humanity.
Mm,
That's all. So now, if somebody wants to go and do that because they have a kind of an issue that well,
mm,
that's for them to do. But what I'm trying to say, like again,
mm,
it's not oh everything else is the same, just change the label. We've already discussed so many
yeah,
ways in which
right,
actually
right. I
the
understand.
fundamentals
Yes, I
need to
understand.
change. The way you see revelation, the
Yes.
way you see the prophetic example, right? So it's not it's a different proposition about how to be human, how to be human, aligned with reality. If you want to draw
mm,
disproportionately from this particular strand of human history to gain your
mm,
guidance, do so, fine. But understand what you're doing and do it in a way that makes sense to
yeah,
your context. That's all. Otherwise, you'll
mm,
dishonor it completely. That's all.
okay.
So this way, you open yourself up to wisdom wherever it is, goodness wherever it is, truth wherever it is, and you move forward. And that's it. And that's it. That's
Mm,
being human. There's no label required. No. And then divisions, if there are divisions will take place because of the people who are pursuing injustice versus the people who want to pursue justice. Because the people who are pursuing, like, good outcomes for the people and more universal outcomes versus the ones who are pursuing outcomes for for a smaller group, right? For the people who are pursuing kind of material outcomes versus those who are trying to create a culture which is a higher culture. That's where. So it's not that there won't be divisions. It's not that there won't be
mm,
conflict, right? For sure, right? But it's still my fellow human being, right? And
mm,
he or she's seeing it in a wrong way, or doing something wrong, or I am, or whatever. But we can we try and have a conversation. I need to label the dude and demonize him forever. That's exactly the point. You don't want to be done to you, but then don't do it to anybody else, right?
mm,
And labeling
yeah.
is literally labeling in this unnecessarily is the first step, yeah, to
Mm,
the process that ends up in genocide, actually, or mass kind of, whatever, like excommunication or second class citizenship or whatever, right? Those people, and it's when the label, like, it's not even a reasonable label to capture, like, as if they're all the same. Then it assumes that's the other problem with the label, right?
right.
Like, the Muslims. What the Muslims, man? Like, as in, that is such a ridiculously vast, even in Britain or America separately, right? Britain's Muslims. Do you realize what, like when if you were to line them all up, right, and look at what you're actually looking at, like, there's almost nothing you could say to capture what is common between these people, other than, as we said earlier, the only thing you could possibly say maybe is the verbal affirmation of a doctrinal proposition, which frankly, amongst many of them, may not even be understood at the most basic level. So now
Mm,
what, Muslims? It's a myth. It's a myth. It's a complete myth.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good segue into maybe the final question we'll cover for today, which is only about half of the points I wanted to discuss on this,
Perfect. No worries.
entire topic. But the whole concept of, so you talked a lot about truth and alignment, virtue across traditions, but traditions often make contradictory claims, right? Like directly contradictory claims. And of course, like I don't think we delved directly into this last time, but you have one person who claims that Jesus is God, or they
You
believe in the
love this one.
Trinity,
Yeah,
right?
everything. Your whole life is
I
about
do,
this
I
issue.
do. Well, I mean, I'm just saying. And then you have a person who says no, pure monotheism, right? And there's no
Yeah.
Trinity; it's just Unitarian,
Yeah.
and we believe Jesus is not obviously Son of God or God in that
Yeah.
sense. So, um, yeah. So obviously, those are two directly contradictory claims, right?
Okay. So how do
And
we assess
so,
them? Yeah. So how do we reconcile? That's what you want to know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Fine. But what's the model? The model is simple, right? That's right. Don't believe anything that doesn't have a benefit or a point, right? Like, what's like, and just don't believe for the sake of believing, like, and don't believe because, well, that's what Christians do. So let's go and believe that Jesus is the Son of God or whatever, right? Like, what I'm trying to say is, like,
mm,
you know, I would say to people who hold this up, it's exactly as we discussed. It's that lowest common denominator type of approach, right? You know, look, for a human being to call upon another human being or to relate to another human being in that kind of way is just clearly nonsensical, right? And you can make the case for that. And I don't need to be a Muslim to make the case for that. Like, there's so many
mm,
quote unquote non-Muslims, non-Christians who think that's a bizarre thing to do. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
mm,
So what I'm saying is there's
yeah,
loads of beliefs and things people think about and hold on to as which are problematic, either unnecessary, not based on any evidence, not have an actual, what's the actual value here, confusing the way of thinking. Okay, so deal with it then. Deal with it. But what I'm trying to say is that dealing with it doesn't rely on scripture,
mm,
right? I don't need to look at the Quran to
mm,
know that Jesus wasn't God. I just need to know that he urinated.
mm,
like,
yeah,
that's enough. It's enough. And frankly speaking, was it a miraculous conception? Was it not? Was he resurrected? Was he not? What's it got to do with my life? I don't have to believe something about everything. I can suspend my whatever, right? It's got nothing to do with my life.
Yeah.
I'm not getting resurrected like in this life anytime soon, as far as I can tell, right? And I'm not
Yeah.
claiming to be God, and I don't see anybody else who's around me who's claiming to be God in that sense. So why don't we like? What's it got to do with? I don't know if we have this phrase here. Reminds me, like somebody was. What's that got to do with the price of fish? It's so random, but basically it means like, what are you on about, bro? Right?
Yeah.
Like, who cares? Why are we even thinking or speaking about this?
The reason we are speaking about this is because
Yeah, people have this belief.
just like, well, just like we have this concern for people and their worldly affairs, and we see the harms of certain things, like you brought up alcohol and other things, right? Well, one would argue that belief is even more serious because it has ramifications on one's afterlife, not to
Oh
mention
no, this is
one's
a total
life.
nonsense. I'm sorry, look, we've discussed this.
No, no,
It's
well,
not.
let me just
It's not.
finish. Let me just
No,
finish.
you can't. No, but you can't because you can't get away with that, Frazan. Right? You can't say beliefs have the consequence of the afterlife, but the actions of that's just about this. Like, why make a separation? Why are you making a separation? Like, no, actions have consequences everywhere, here and there, and beliefs have consequences everywhere, here and there. And it's a false binary to say, well, no, this section that's
Mm,
relevant for whether you're going to end up in hell or heaven, but this partner that's just about here and like, come on, that's not even
mm,
reasonable. That's not even reasonable
mm,
Quranically, right? Like in any way whatsoever. So what I'm trying to
mm,
say is that like all of the like it's not like okay the guy who doesn't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, the guy who's a monotheist, right, but is an oppressor and is like killed like hundreds of people, or who runs a country and basically has policies that's like starving half the nation, but he's okay because he's a monotheist. No, like remember, God doesn't care what you believe.
yeah,
I don't know. No one cares what you believe. I want to know what you're doing. So, frankly speaking, you could argue it the other way around. You could say that, okay, like errant beliefs, they don't really actually make any difference to how the person is manifesting on a day to day basis, particularly, right? But if asked, they believe this, but it's not like a deeply held belief that is kind of corrupting their whole way of being in truth, in reality, in a way that's actually manifesting, right, as a problem. Okay, fine. You might say, well, okay, fine. Look, believe what you want to believe, right? If you, like, it's not correct, it's unnecessary, but if that's your thing, then whatever, right? Like, but just why don't we just deal with these things on the basis of actual, like, um, yeah, just the relevance of things? Because as we said, that we've been discussing all this time, people don't go to heaven or hell or don't have a positive kind of existential outcome because of what they believed. It's
yeah,
because of what they actually, who they, because of who they became, right, and who they became, what the substance of their soul, right, who they are,
yeah, right.
like
Well,
that's
I
it.
mean, I guess, yeah. So, I mean, this leads to another point, which is about how devotion to God is done, you know? And so, I think there was a comment on episode 2, if I'm not mistaken, where someone was like, well, you know, if you wanted to, how would you tell a person that you're going to do salah at work, you know?
Mm,
And like, would you invite them to do that
mm,
uh, if you know they're not quote unquote Muslim, right?
mm.
And I think you replied to that, and you were like, okay, so the question in the context of what we're talking about is like, if someone prays to Jesus, right? And someone is calling out, I mean, the Quran is vehemently against this. Obviously, this is the whole concept of shirk, is to
Mm.
call upon other than God, to associate partners with God, to make equals with God, etc. Right? So how could you say that those two things could at the same time be okay just based on a person's actions, right?
What
Like a
what two
person
things?
could be, meaning like a person who believes and calls out to Jesus or
Yeah,
idols or whatever else, right? That like
yeah,
they're doing shirk according to the
yeah,
clear definition of the Quran, like they're
yeah.
doing shirk, they're associating partners with God. Like,
I
are
didn't
you
say it's
saying that
okay.
has
I didn't say it's okay yet.
no,
I
no,
didn't
no,
say it's okay.
no, no, I know, but I'm saying like, I'm
But
saying that that
but I also said I
person,
don't need to look at the Quran to know that it's not okay.
no, 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 but what I'm saying is like, if that person lives a good life, right? And like you're
Yes.
saying, well, inna Allah la yudhi'u ajra al-muhsinin, et cetera, like,
Right.
you know, but
Yeah.
that fundamental, like they're mushrik in that sense, right? They're
Okay.
someone who associates partners with God. Then
Hmm.
what is the status of such a person?
But what, this
And
is the
is
thing.
it
Wrong
not?
question. I'm
Well,
afraid.
no,
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 yeah, wrong
but
question.
is it
This doesn't
not the
matter what
case that if you
this.
know, no, is it not the case that if you know that if someone is associating partners with God,
Yes.
that it would behoove oneself to share the message of monotheism and pure monotheism with that person, and that should be of great concern, right? Yeah.
Sure. If that's what you want to do, then if that's what a person wants to do, then yeah, sure, do it. Right. What I'm trying to say is
Okay.
that it's interesting you say that, because like you asked at the beginning, yeah, but given all the wars and given all the kind of crises and given all the poverty and given everything else, like what's that got to do with the price of fish? You know? So the point being is, it's like, I'm not saying, now you might say, oh, because in the hereafter, ABC, right? And I'm saying, well, look, all of these things are problems here and there and everywhere. So is that a problem amongst problems? Yeah. Is it a problem that people believe? Is it a problem like that people idolize certain celebrities? So as far as I'm concerned, that's more of a practical problem right now than whether they idolize Jesus. The obsession with the Jesus thing as a particular thing, like it's just one of many idols, let's say, that people have,
Yeah.
right? And the beliefs that they have, either verbally, right, or inherited, or manifested. We're all manifesting our action. The reason why about the actions is because the actions manifest your true beliefs. That's what the point being. Yeah, your actions manifest your true beliefs. When people, there are some people when they pray, like not all praying to Jesus is the same.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, and in fact, there are aspects of invoking the name of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, right, which is obviously a heavily debated thing with regards to the idea of supplication, which comes extremely close, if not is the same or goes beyond what some Christians do with regards to how they invoke the name of Jesus in the context of prayer, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is that, but you know, to my mind, all of that is complete, like, total nonsense, right? That's like absolutely irrelevant, completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know, by the light of
I
Muhammad,
know.
this and what? Come on, man, give me a break. Yeah, just like talk to God, right? Straight up, if you want to do that. Like that, it's just such an unnecessary complication. Like look, I'm a minimalist in regards to these things. La ilaha illallah. That is it. Okay, and that again, by the way, I would that's just an Arabic formulation of the existential principle that anybody can intuit if you spend enough, like it's not even about time actually, but if you're just able to see and perceive, right, beyond like the material thing, you realize in the end, there is nothing worth pursuing except for the ultimate. That's it, right? I'm not going to allow anything to complicate that. I'm not going to allow, labels, concepts of religion, all forms of idolatry, Jesus or not Jesus, this sort of pop star or not pop star, whatever, right? People literally, I mean, literally, if you take like, I remember at the time when, Taylor Swift was doing her kind of world record breaking, tour or whatever, right? The things you would just come up in the news and hear around this stuff, right? That's literally, I mean, like, yes, for many young girls, she's literally a goddess, right?
I mean,
Right.
it depends on how you
No.
what
It's
you
not
mean
doesn't
by that,
depend on
because
anything.
no one's praying to her. No one's asking her.
Well,
You know what I mean? Like
well,
it
no,
is different.
no,
It
it's
is
not
different in
different.
that
It's not
regard.
different
It
actually.
is a bit.
No, it's not different because what is prayer? What is supplication? It is a relationship. It is the way you relate to somebody or someone in order to hoping that you're going to gain something. They're going to give you something. In fact, it's the greatest form of salah. Literally, it's almost Hajj. It's pilgrimage. You are literally. I mean, I'm not joking here. You go to a concert in that way. It's literally a pilgrimage. You're taking a journey to a particular place to engage in a particular ritual centered around a particular central point. In this case, a particular figure who's doing whatever they're doing and having messages. There are all messages there. There's moods being imparted, and you return back a different person. Is literally it's right. Now, what I'm trying to say is that kind of experience or similar kind of experiences may be experienced in a way that is healthy and actually additive, right? Or the opposite. But it is absolutely open to a type of idolatry, very clearly, right? And even the idolatry with regards to Jesus may not be one of prayer. For example, let's say somebody's not like every day, oh, Jesus Christ, my Lord, give me A, give me B, give me C, right? Let's say they're not doing that. But on a day-to-day basis, therefore, they kind of uses this notion in their mind is just this notion that Jesus died for my sins, right? And therefore, essentially, one feels, perhaps has misunderstood that to mean, they feel a free, like a kind of an abandon with regards to whatever they do or don't do, right? Okay, so that's also a kind of like an errant sort of belief or a quasi sort of idolatry, etc., etc. I'm saying the way we're trying to apply all these things and do these categories is just too rigid. Again, I would just say apply common sense. All of these things are expansions of what's commonsensical notions and ideas, which is that when we get too caught up, or we erect something that becomes our object of devotion other than what is ultimate, and it ends up confusing the way in which we see things and do things, right? To be honest, the bigger problem of Jesus as the Son of God and the Christian formation of it, exactly the same problem that we're speaking about, which is that it naturally causes a division between the people who believe Jesus is the Son of God and people who don't. Practically speaking, that's your problem. You basically got to believe, which is just really unnecessary in order to function in life, right? In such a way that it's causing problems, because now the way you see other people is that where they don't know the good news that Jesus died for their sins and he's the Son of God, right?
Yeah.
Instead of looking at him, he's exactly the same. I'm saying to look at the Muhammadan example, which is a remarkable human being who upturned their society, right, based on core messages that were contrarian, because and a way to a person for them to relate deeply to themselves, to their reality, right, and to bring about better outcomes, right, and struggled and suffered on the way. And as is always happens with heroes like this, right, is that the example just gets completely misunderstood. Right? The point gets completely misunderstood, and things get erected and elevated. And frankly speaking, what Christians are doing to Jesus, we're doing with, like, the Sharia, the tradition, even the prophetic example, in a kind of way, in a misapplied and misunderstood way. It becomes like the object in and of itself of devotion. So religion can be like, there's a kind of where religion becomes the idol, the label becomes the idol, capital Islam becomes the idol. I know it sounds like weird, but it's true. That's literally what happens. Because you can see that, because in doing so, you're missing the actual truth, the actual real value add that you're supposed to be pursuing. So it is an idol that gets in the way between you and God, because true godliness results in phenomenal outcomes with struggle, with pain, with sacrifice, yes, and over time. But at least you're moving in a trajectory. At least there's a narrative. I'm going to suggest to you that, like, the kind of basic foundational thing here that I think makes the case for a kind of powerful narratives to emerge that speak inspirationally to the situation that we're in, right? If those narratives existed for people who are saying that they're coming from these, like they're drawing their guidance from here and there, I would shut up and just follow in with that. But those narratives don't exist, barely exist, in a way that is addressing people at large, right? And addressing their concerns and uniting godliness and goodness together in a way that makes any sense. Right? I wish it existed, because my life would be like, I could just, do something else. Okay. But it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And it is because of a fundamental Muslim idolatry. Yes. And so I don't really get, so why are we not concerned about that? That's what I'm saying. Like, the kind of idolatry, it can be concerned with idolatry because of what it is affecting, the harms it's causing. Right? So it's the same. So, yeah. That's it.
Okay. Cool.
I mean, just
think that.
I mean, do you think that we have dealt with therefore? I mean, do you feel that now the benefits are? I mean, are they clearer? Because that was the point of this discussion.
Yes, yeah, definitely. To a certain extent. I mean, there are still a few points that I have, as I mentioned, right?
What are they? Can you just tell me what they're on bullet point 4? I'm not going to respond to them, but just
Sure, yeah. So let me pull them up here. So
we need to move on, man. There's other things I want to talk about. I can't handle this anymore.
no, I know.
We need to talk about the nature of revelation. That's going to be sparky.
I know. I mean, some of these things have come up just a bit, obviously.
This is an important topic to get into. Deeply.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do that next, because I'm not sure I can handle Islam Muslim anymore. It will keep coming up anyway.
Yeah. So, So one example is like, if I know someone is Muslim, I roughly know kind of shared assumptions around belief, prayer, fasting, worship, scripture, law, etc. Right? So without shared religious categories, how does communal religious life function coherently? So that's, do we replace one word with dozens of sort of clarifying questions? Obviously, this relates to also the forms of devotion in terms of prayer, fasting, also marriage, food, etc., right?
Yeah.
There's also verses in the Quran, for example, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ, right? وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. So when Allah refers to the believers, He's specifically saying there's a special bond or relationship between believers, mu'minun. So that's another question. What else is there? Yeah, I think that is probably the biggest remaining question, actually. Yeah, now that I look at my list, that's probably like the one or two final question on this note.
Okay.
So hopefully we can begin the next discussion with just addressing those. We can then provide kind of a summary and main takeaways from these initial few discussions, and then I think we can move on to some of these other topics that you want to discuss, inshallah, God willing.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks. See you next time. Peace.
Okay. All right. It's been a pleasure. Take care.